Kia ora and welcome to our first episode of a slightly different podcast, Learning on Tap. So Learning on Tap is going to be a series of discussions and interviews that we have with experts from across the education and education adjacent field that is about issues that are affecting our young people and our schools. So today we are incredibly lucky to sit down with someone who has been at the absolute forefront of human rights and disability advocacy in Aotearoa. As IHC's Director of Advocacy, Trish Grant has dedicated her career to fighting for equity, inclusion, and systemic change. So welcome to the podcast this afternoon, Trish. Lovely to have you.
Oh, kia ora, and thank you for that welcome. I'm not currently the Director of Advocacy. I've retired from that role. I'm contracting back to IHC to progress our education-related work.
Excellent. So you're at large. Isn't that what they say? Yeah, where people are at large, out in the field and supporting. Excellent.
Hey, Josh, we were really keen to talk about learning support as the very first episode here for, I guess, all sorts of reasons. You can't come across a staff room in the country where learning support won't be in the kind of top two issues. But I also think for us at AEC, learning support is one of those parts of the system that we need to get right because it speaks to the equity and the inclusion that we hold as really important concepts within education. And I think we're particularly excited hearing more about the work from IHC because you're in the unique position of being in a situation where the government is compelled to act on the outcomes of the court case. And so for lots of us that have been involved with learning support advocacy for a long time, it's always been about pushing a particular view, whereas we're really keen to see where this is going to go because of the commitment that the Ministry of Education is compelled to make. I know I've been involved historically with pay equity settlements that end up having similar consequences where there are kind of outcomes that have to be achieved. And I know one of the ones that's close to my heart is around the teacher aid pay equity. There are still parts of that settlement kind of 8 years on that still haven't fully been realised. And so, we are really keen to explore the journey that IHC has been on and where that might go. And so we might pass over to you to maybe take us back in time to the court case and what led up to it.
Okay. We lodged a claim, a legal claim, under Part 1A of the Human Rights Act in 2008. Now, why we did that? We felt that IHC, being a disability organisation founded by families who had always felt that the place for their children to learn was at their local school. They felt that being at your local school with your brothers and sisters, your cousins, the kids down the road, built you, set you up for a life of citizenship and inclusion and community. So it was future-proofing a place and community for disabled students. Now, that those founding families, established that kaupapa, which is still dear to our hearts today, which is all kids with a disability or neurodiversity are learners and need to be viewed and valued as learners in their local school. And we should have an education system that understands them and responds to their learning and other support needs and their sense, their need for belonging like every other child is. So, in 1989, parents around the country were going, well, yay, our problems are solved. Our kids have got a legal right to go and, to be at school alongside their non-disabled peers. Well, wasn't for very long that people felt that legal right was kind of an empty right and that there were problems with the realisation of that right at school. Principals were saying, "Oh, nice to see you, but, school's down the road, it's better for you. Oh, you can come, but only come till lunchtime. Oh, no, not camps. No, don't come. No, oh, no." So there are all these restrictions placed on attendance and participation and being like all the other kids at school, being there for the long haul and being valued for who you are and having what you need to learn and belong. So from 89 onwards, IHC became a focal point for people families would tell us about the problems that were happening for them at school and how the legal right didn't mean a thing. It was just on paper. It just wasn't experienced every day. And then we also started talking to people in the education sector who were saying, look, the thing that, stops our welcome mat staying out there on the porch is we haven't got the kind of human and financial resourcing to do this thing really well. So since then, I think we have known as a country that there are problems with the way the education system responds to all learners, but specifically responds differently to some groups of learning, Māori and Pacifica students, disabled students, in every report that's been written in the last 3 decades, those groups of students have stood out as not being well served by our education system. So we were talking regularly with the ministry up until 2008, but they became kind of circular conversations. And of course, what we've got in the middle of all this is not just about disabled students' rights to education. We've got an education delivery model that kind of compounds the policy problems as well. So it's a complex area. And so we thought, we can talk till we're blue in the face with the ministry, with the Teaching Council, with the Education Review of others, but actually we need acknowledgement that this is a systems problem and actually government systems should deliver evenly to all students. And what we knew from the stories told to us was that disabled students were being discriminated against on a daily basis. So we found a legislative pathway, and that was through Part 1A of the Human Rights Act, which protects us all as New Zealand citizens from discrimination. So, and that was intentional too, because we wanted to lift this argument up. We wanted to pull it up out of an education kind of context and say, well, what would happen if we saw this as within a human rights context? And that's exactly what was needed, because the human right to education is a foundational right for these students. It often means, their ability to have other human rights and have the kind of life many take for granted. So we lodged it in 2008, and it's been a very long path to 2025 when the legal settlement was signed off by the Minister, by the Secretary for Education, and by IHC's Chief Executive. So 18 years of hard graft. Now, it's been good that over that time, various things have happened in the outside world. We've signed up to UN conventions on the rights of the child, on the rights of disabled persons. We've begun to think differently about citizenship for all citizens, not just for the majority. We've begun to, and it's true that successive governments have tried to, with good intent, tried to fix the policy problems without success. The problems that were alive and well in 2008 when we lodged this case are alive and well today. And it's, staggering really that we've made such little progress, and that as you every staff room, it's an issue. Principals every year say it's an issue. Families know it's an issue. And we know that the outcomes for disabled students in terms of their learning and belonging in society are just as bad today as they were back then. So each government has tried to do a range of things. And hello, we've got more positions, RTLBs, learning support coordinators, or we've got another pot of money that's magically opened up. And they've all been well-intentioned. However, we know that the problems that play out in the lives of children and school teachers and principals every day are to do with problems that lie deep, deep in the system. And they're to do with our funding policies, the way we collect data, the way we, the education stewards, work together or not to solve the problems, how we support teachers in their initial education and their development and mentoring, how we have the right workforce, access to really good specialists when required for as long as needed. There's a whole bunch of things that are policy problems. And that to solve one is only solving one of them. They all work together. And that's why we've developed a framework of 9 element areas that are all interdependent and relate to each other. So there's not one simple fix, and it's not going to be an easy fix. What our framework that the minister and the ministry now have a legal obligation to implement. And we've said, well, it's going to take at least 6 years. So they've agreed there's a problem.
So was it 2025 that they've agreed that this was passed? Yeah.
Yeah. So they agreed that the system is broken for disabled and neurodiverse students. They've agreed that IHC's framework will solve some of the problems. It's not a perfect thing, but it's a place to start. And they've also agreed that this is going to take a long time to fix. The system has to change in a fundamental way. And that you can't, it's going to take a while for the big ship to turn around. So at least 6 years. But as well as that agreement, they've agreed to have an independent monitoring group that has oversight of the ministry's work program. And can have input into and influence that work program over the next 6 years. And so that was very important for IHC because we thought the people who've experienced the harm and the distress and the discrimination needed to be represented on this group. So we have disabled people, we have whānau, we have some teachers, we have people who have worked in the space for a long time who understand both the history and the challenges of learning support policy and the way it's kind of morphed over time. So there's only 9 people. So it's a big job, and we've just begun.
So can I ask a question about that stakeholder group? Because I find that stakeholder group concept fascinating, particularly in the current climate where we've seen, the removal of expertise from stakeholder groups across the board. And we've seen this re-centralisation of appointing and controlling the stakeholder group. So it was really interesting to read that in your case, IHC hold 2 permanent seats and actually chair that group. So the idea is that you will, in essence, have a line of sight and an element of controlling the stakeholder group moving forward. And that's a commitment that they have to stick to. Am I correct?
IHC is absolutely committed to that. We don't want to control the group. I'm just saying we want the group to fulfill its purpose, which is monitoring and providing insight and influence on the work program attached to the implementation of our framework. So, IHC's invested kind of 18 years of hard work into getting this result. I'm just in awe of the courage of our board over that time to keep on investing. Education is such an important thing, and it wasn't just for kids with intellectual disability. It was a pan-disability human rights complaint. So we were prepared to take some leadership in that and felt that, even though we're a small NGO and it's a kind of a David and Goliath kind of story, we've probably, been able to do this work because of the support we've had from families and the board. And also we're not involved with education delivery, We're about human rights, even though we've got a service arm, which is different from, it is a separate company. So I see this was just about who we were. It's about doing what's right for people's rights. It's about inclusion. We could not do it. actually.
So the focus of this group and the focus of this framework for action is
Mm.
this focus on the compulsory sector, so across primary and secondary. It doesn't go up into tertiary, does it?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
No.
We did it for primary and secondary education, formal education. That was our focus because that's where we got the stories of difficulty from initially. We could have gone earlier, and it was compulsory education, so it made the margins easier to manage, I guess. I mean, clearly there's a need in early childhood and in tertiary, but that's where we put our focus. Alleging that the government systems and structures created a discriminatory impact for disabled students.
So in the sorry, Liam, I'll just jump up.
Yeah,
I'll let Liam speak at some point. But I'm intrigued. We're 1 year into sort of the 6-year timeline of this stuff rolling out and happening. So the stakeholder group is established. Is that sort of one of the first things that you focused on establishing? Is that correct?
Yeah, it was advertised through the Education Gazette and other places and our networks, and it had an overwhelming response. The hundreds of people wanted to be on that group because, as you say, this is an issue of concern, high public interest, and it's gone on for too long. So people at a kind of a heart and gut level know, something's got to change. Something's big's got to change here, and they want to be part of the change. So it was incredibly, time-consuming to choose the group. It's just a small number with so many people wanting to be on it. Fantastic people.
I just want to go back in time slightly. How on earth does a court case take 16 years? I mean, people complaining about the inefficiency of government can probably have a field day there. And I think you're quite right to point out that this is kind of failings across successive governments, and the actual claim was with the Ministry of Education. But I mean...
And the minister, yeah.
But I mean, is it one of those things where they're just dragging their heels through this because they don't want to have to cop the outcome of it and then kind of settle once the writing was on the wall, or is that a bit pessimistic?
Well, you're right. It did take a long time, and there's a side piece you might want to do in your series about how we invest in human rights in New Zealand. One of the things we haven't invested very well in is the Human Rights Review Tribunal, and that became an issue in our case. So when you lodge a case like we did, it has to go through the Human Rights Commission first, and then you need to go to mediation. Well, that took many years because the Crown initially said they didn't completely understand our case. They, there was a lot of back and forth till, we were fairly blue in the face. So it wasn't until it went from the ministry refused to go to mediation actually in the beginning. So we then went to the Office of Human Rights Proceedings, and they have a director there who can decide to take on cases under Part 1A. And they have some criteria, and one of high public interest impacting a whole bunch of people, and our case fitted that. So the first director, Bob Hesketh, filed a claim in the Human Rights Review Tribunal in 2012. And then he Johnny Bob retired, didn't he? Which was a shame. And then anyway, so it took a long time. And then we got IHC funded the fabulous Frances Joychild to take on our case, and she filed a new amended statement of claim. And then the ministry decided there were 3 things that they had difficulty with, so that they did a strikeout claim. So it was a fairly hostile response from the Crown to our case, which was kind of interesting itself. In 2015, it's not light years away, but when you think a case involving the education rights of disabled students could be responded to in such an aggressive way, we don't believe you, we want this struck out, get out of here. And then the issue of funding, it took 5, so we had that little dilly-dally, that conversation in court on those 3 issues in 2015. It wasn't until 2020 that the Human Rights Review Tribunal handed down a decision that said you can proceed IHC. The ministry hasn't put up the kind of arguments that mean anything in this situation. So proceed, which we did. So we were then preparing to go to court. We were talking to families and professionals like yourselves to give evidence. Everyone said, yes, can't wait. And then we decided, time moved on. And if you're thinking about 2020, 2022, several reports came out, the ERO report, which looked like something IHC had written. These are the problems. These are the recommendations. There was another report from the ministry itself. There was the high needs review. So there was increasing agreement that actually what I actually had been saying in 2008 was alive and well today, and we were correct. So I think the Crown was in more of a position to have a conversation. So when you take legal action, you can ask to move into a without prejudice, confidential situation to try and resolve the issues. And we had a new person running the case, Michael Timmins, and he described this as strategic litigation. So it's an opportunity for both parties to have the kind of discussion behind closed doors that will solve the problem. And to anchor that discussion, we put the framework for action on the table. So we spent about 3 years going back and forward on that until we both parties agreed that there was a willingness on the Crown's part to implement the framework actions. So it was a long, long pathway. I looked a lot younger when this all started, but it has really been about tenacity. It's been about holding the line about human rights and that these students matter. And that, we've met so many wonderful, I'm an ex-secondary teacher myself. I understood what the issues were. We know that we could do a whole lot better in New Zealand if we had, if we had the courage to build a system that works for all.
So does it, how do you feel? Like, it was quite interesting. Like, I was looking at your different parts of the framework, and there's a couple of areas where I sort of go, this makes so much sense, but it does not make sense when I look at what's currently happening. So there's a real mismatch.
Yeah.
Like the overhauling the funding frameworks, and then we see, the great big song and dance announcements we had around learning support that then haven't actually resulted in the changes that we need. And also, I'd say the same with curriculum and environment and accessibility, but we'll tackle those as two separate issues. So in terms of overhauling the funding framework, and when you talk about OARS, like, I know as a school leader that has got no better. That continues to be, an infuriatingly challenging process for us to go through. There seems to have been a whole lot of, headline stand-up statements around increased spending on learning support, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it's translated to, to tangible changes on the ground. What's the sense from your stakeholder group around those funding announcements and why they're falling short?
Well, I think those of us around the table, political, there will always be political priorities playing out within the ministry's, kind of policy work. And let's just be real about that. And so some of, I think, Len, we've talked before about wouldn't it be great if there were some things that all parties could agree on that could mean long-term sustained and positive change. Because some of these things are really, obviously the distress has been played out in the media and the conversations that families and professionals have, but in some way, and they're real. And also, I think it's important that we focus our attention on what are the system's levers, not political whims, that will create the most change. For curriculum, for example, disabled children haven't been well served by the curriculum. Can't see themselves in it, haven't
they're going to see that even less with the reforms that we've got on the table. I mean, that's one of those things I really struggled with, because like how can your group that is an acknowledged, formed stewardship group that the minister and ministry have a commitment to listen to, like how do our current curriculum reforms and the assessment reforms, which are potentially going to close out, they know they're going to close out pathways for some of these young people.
Yeah, and I think, last time we did talk about the curriculum, we've talked about data. I think there is a realization that life's pretty hard for many people out there at the moment. The wording of our framework element on curriculum was deliberately broad, knowing how bad it had been in the past. And so we might get a minister next after the next election who will come up with something entirely different. So we need something that's going to survive beyond, or in spite of political priorities, because
the current reforms are going to do harm, and they're going to do outsized harm to our young people with disabilities, in my opinion.
I think the disabled students have had harmful impact from the education system for at least 3 decades. Okay. And the country just stands by and watches it. I think it's an absolute blight on our, moral compass that we've let this happen, and people are just kind of inured to the problem. Oh, that's just what happens for those kids. It's okay if they leave school at lunchtime. Well, it's not okay. So let's get real about the long-term harm that's been caused, and the lives that have been altered through not having a good education. People are sitting on couches all over New Zealand instead of going to jobs, volunteering, learning or contributing, So the education system has not served disabled students well. We need a complete systems shift for it to do so. And that's in terms of, 3 things. The people in it. Have we got enough knowledge? The people. Have we got enough money invested in education? And have we got the right information? It's, as a country, I don't think we're there yet in having a good quality public education system that works for all learners. So
it wasn't lost on you, Trish, but I mean, this isn't just about getting politicians over the line. There's an awful lot of work we need to do in the eyes of voters around the kind of fundamental rights that citizens have to be kind of free and flourishing. And as I look through your action framework here, there is that tension between, do you get it really high level so that it's going to be survivable across multiple different governments, knowing that if you get too specific, it'll just be scuttled. But then you also run the risk, if it's so high level, it's really tough to kind of have the detail that is actually going to make a difference on the ground.
Yeah.
And as I was reading through it, the one that stood out to me was the last one around deficit-based approaches, because actually in some of the detail there, the Ministry of Education is kind of missing in action, where it talks about the hopes that IHC has around what that will do moving forward. And it's almost more powerful that the Ministry of Education isn't in that sentence, because it kind of suggests that in a document that I'm sure they combed over, they were happy to just have IHC's hopes and aspirations in that part.
Let me just go. You've surprised me with that wording quote. Is that from?
Oh, so it's got strengths rather than deficits. And then the third bullet point is IHC hopes that this will result in policy that focuses on what disabled children need for learning rather than their perceived deficits.
Yeah, sure. And this was a document produced by IHC for our stakeholders. So, but the discussion that we've had with, in fact, we're just working on terms of reference from some research at the moment, which is going to be done between the Ministry of Education and Whaikaha to really critically look at what's the impact of those deficit-based, funding criteria. How does it make the child feel and the people around them? Does it impact on their attitudes and the valuing of that child as a learner? And we suspect not. So, it's a brave ministry to say, well, we do want to know whether our policies have created some unintended consequences. Are they ableist? Really? We want to know that. So it's really good that they've agreed to do that piece of work to understand better the impact of those kind of policies, because there's been huge concern about those deficit-based, if you look at, say, in the disability world, enable good lives, mama enhancing policies, strengths-based. And we've got this terrible, terrible way of, you've got to be tragic enough to get half of what you need.
Does your group have an opportunity to engage with feedback on current reforms? Like, I'm thinking specifically around the plan to replace NCEA with NZACE and the like, and specifically the impact that I see it having on our disabled students and neurodivergent students that have. I know you've said they've been underserved for the last couple of decades, but there is at least some flexibility in NCA and the opportunity to do internal assessments, et cetera, that does make that sort of high level, high status qualification potentially more accessible. And I'm guessing, like, I have real concerns about the ladder being pulled up. And there was a recent article about, it was in this case a young woman that had been unwell with long COVID. So, and she was talking about, so not a disability per se, but it was someone that had benefited from the flexibility and the fact that she could catch up, do things at different times and what have you. And she was deeply concerned about the impact that these changes are going to have when it becomes more locked down. The ministry came back to that young woman's concerns and dismissed them because of SACs, special assessment conditions. And you will know as well as I know as a school leader, that will go nowhere near far enough. A reader, writer, or some extra time in a lockdown, one point in time style assessment is not going to be enough to meet the needs of the diverse needs of disabled, neurodivergent young people. At least that's my sense. What is the opportunity for a stakeholder group like yours to have a really compelling voice in that space? Because my worry is they're just not listening.
I can say hand on heart, like at the last meeting, we've got two wonderful women on the, two of the teachers, one an assistant principal and one from Kura Kaupapa, who put out the challenges on curriculum from their experience and from what was going on in their schools. Now, absolutely, the ministry will have lots of challenges put down about the group's concerns and individuals within the group's concerns. Now, what happens if we disagree? Like within our deed of settlement legal arrangement, there are pathways that we can go down to resolving disputes, raising matters directly with the minister, going into mediation and, saying, well, this isn't working, we're not getting what we want, and out of this we'll just go back to court. So
is that your teeth? Is that your way of having because that was the question I was going to ask. So sort of like, where's the teeth in these
well, the teeth
promises
in the discussions each meeting and what happens in between meetings, and there will be robust and challenging discussions within the meetings and between meetings. Andrew Chris, IHC's chief executive, he's chairing the meeting. He's wanting to see progress, tangible progress from each meeting. He's very clear. He's an excellent chair. I think many of the discussions will be challenging. There'll be times when we'll be heard and there'll be times then maybe we're not heard, but we'll keep on raising. We're all committed people. We will keep raising the difficult issues because this is a chance that hasn't been had before. And we want to make the most of this opportunity to have discussions and to keep in the room. We've got a youth opportunity. Yeah.
There is lots of parts of the framework where I just think it's a no-brainer for those people working in the sector. Probably one of the standout ones, though, that might buck the trend is around the kind of role of data. And I think the kind of general nervousness and levels of low trust that people in the sector have for the Ministry of Education collecting data. At the same time, I would assume that would be the one that the Ministry of Education would be most excited about.
Well, I can't speak for the ministry, but let's just understand that the resourcing, why IFC is so keen on collecting the right sort of data, is we want that data to inform a resourcing framework, a funding policy that actually gives kids what they need and schools what they need. So we know that learning support policy has always been based on guesstimates. We've never known exactly how many students need something additional or something different, what that costs, where those children are, or what that funding, how effective was that funding.
Yep.
So we've had this kind of really laissez-faire approach to, one, it's hard to get funding, but there's no accountability of outcomes around those funding investments either. So we've got this really loose arrangement in a policy system sense, haven't we? That the Autumn policy was based on really flawed assessments of prevalence. 1.3% of kids, and the behaviour initiative and the communication initiative. Overseas prevalence rates are somewhere between 14 and 18% of the student population of kids who require some kind of accommodations made to learn well in ways that work for them. So we need funding policies that match need, where you can see the demand, the need, and the policies there. No one should have to beg for this or go without when it's your pathway to learning. But that's what's happening. And schools are having to make, really tough decisions every day about, well, you'll just have to stay home. I haven't got a teacher aid, a learning assistant for that day.
Yeah.
And it's really very, very stressful for schools, I know, but for families and for students themselves, yeah. So that's why, we took the legal action. That's why we've settled it on the basis that the ministry is committed to their obligation to implement the framework and for that period of time. And if there is another government, hopefully, we did a election meeting with politicians at the last election. Every one of them agreed that the system was broken. Everyone agreed to work together on the solutions. Has that happened?
No.
Not yet, hey? Not yet.
Look, I know that educators hold that kind of conflicting view around the need for good data to be able to inform decisions, but also that kind of low trust that the Ministry of Education won't misuse it, not even in the short term, but over the kind of medium and long term. And we often reflect. We often reflect on the role that the likes of NZCR plays around PAT data. Kind of responsible steward within the education sector. They tend to hold the confidence of the sector around appropriate use of that assessment data. Do you think that it'd be possible to explore having that learning support data held by a third-party group?
I think that's a really good idea because, this area is so political, isn't it? And so it'd be quite good to have an independent agency collecting that money. What schools are paying over and above what they're receiving to really invest in their children, all of the children at the school. And there are, it's not just the learning support policies. How schools are funded has been fraught with. We haven't got there yet about equity indexes, how you actually invest in ways that are going to create the best outcomes or better outcomes. Sorry, I lost you there, Lemma, but on the data, with the Education and Training Act, and there was a requirement on boards to collect data, their own data on the learning progress and achievement of all their students, including those who have missed out, Māori, Pacific, disabled.
Mm.
That hasn't happened. And yet Ero did a report in 2022 saying, 45% of schools surveyed did not have any awareness of their legal obligations in respect of reporting on students. So how as a country have we allowed that to happen? That delivery model hasn't always created a close fit between the promises in the legislation or the policy directives either. And then, on the ground, it's all people working really hard, but, are they well supported? Schools funded.
I'm interested as well with there was the MOE must investigate options for transparent mandatory annual reporting by boards of trustees. So it's really just committing to investigating. But what I'm really interested in is I think there should be a need around stand down and exclusion rates, and actually seeing the role of any neurodivergent disability author, because I think we see a lot of students sort of shifted out of school quietly through a number of stand downs and exclusions, when if you dig a bit deeper, there's absolutely elements of neurodivergence, behavior related to, different kind of disabilities that mean that those young people aren't welcome in schools. You know what I mean? Like, and I've always felt like there's nearly a need for not only schools, and this this will be incredibly unpopular, and I say this as a school leader, I sort of feel like there's also a place for a hotline for those parents to be able to report what is going on as well, because I often feel like parents that are supporting young people that are neurodivergent, that have got disabilities, that feel like they're fighting to get the support they need, often don't feel heard in those processes.
They don't.
And
There is a hotline. There is a hotline, and it's sometimes to me. I do a number of
you are the hotline
cases where I'm sitting beside families in their conversations with schools and with the ministry. We originally had standards and things and those disciplinary processes in our framework. We took it out because there is already in the legislation the framing up of a disputes resolution process. So we weren't going to die in the ditch in that, but actually what we do need is an independent education review tribunal. So not only the decisions by schools are able to be challenged, but the decisions by the ministry as well. As adults, we have access to an independent overview of all decisions about us, our finances, health, whatever. Kids don't. And you are right. Youth Law and other organisations have done surveys. IHC has. Disabled and neurodiverse students overrepresented in those. And also, of course, now we've got physical restraint data showing.
Oh, and I see it as well, like
such a controversial idea. I mean, surely kind of school leaders and people working in schools would want to see that people are getting access to good process. And I kind of see it as a similar service to NZSBA, where school boards can go and get free independent advice around how to navigate the system properly. At the same time, we should be having whānau going, getting access to a service to better understand the process that their child's about to go through. And I think the idea of building advocacy skills in citizens would be something that we should be chasing.
I'd really like to work with other family advocacy groups and the education sector to build something that's known and valued, and that we're all working off the same song sheet. But it is so hard for many families to go into those conversations when, it's fantastic if someone's able to be beside them because, it works better.
I've also got a request. Are you taking requests? Because one of the
God,
things that
no.
because one of the things I've long thought about, we're a school that is seen as particularly responsive in terms of we have personal learning targets and quite a flexible approach to our curriculum. And there's a bit more sort of, the environment that we have seems to be identified as meeting the needs of disabled neurodivergent young people. And one of the things I've long believed is that when a ministry directs a student, they should automatically come with double funding. Like I actually think it would be quite a simple mechanism that if the ministry is going to go so far as to direct a student to come out of one school environment into another, that should come with double funding attached to it. Because, I think it's an indictment on the school that they're leaving from in the first place. But actually, it should be a due recognition of because there are schools like ours. I know there's a number around the country that become a sort of little mini magnet schools, and I love that. I actually see it as a really positive reflection, but it comes with a cost. It comes with an immense resource. Yeah,
wouldn't it be great if your school was incentivised in some way by the system for taking for embracing those children and providing opportunities. So, I think we need to think about the way inclusive education could be incentivised from a financial perspective. Yeah.
I like it. I think we should. But also, double funding available for a school that feels that they're at the point where the only option they can do is to exclude a child. The funding should be kicking in before the exclusion takes place to actually keep them in a school. Hopefully they've got a sense of belonging. Hopefully it is their neighbourhood school. Because we do know that it currently plays out right now that if you're a school with a student that has been excluded coming in, that is your best chance of getting funding to support that child. Whereas the whole system needs to be turned on its head, and we need to be investing at much lower levels of intervention because it stopped kids climbing the ladder in the first place.
Exactly, and if you noticed in our funding element, we've looked at funding effectiveness, and with a real emphasis on earlier intervention, so that you can have wraparound earlier support. I mean, the intensive wraparound policy has been a great success in many, many cases because of the flexibility and the wraparound nature of that. If only we could get that earlier, so that the family and the child are supported as well as the school. This is hard work and you need, all the best advice and support and skills available. But all these kids are capable of learning and for a new start, with the right levels of support.
Hey Trish,
are you worried? Sorry, I know we're about to wrap up. I was just worried about it strikes me that ironic that we've lost the NALPs in all of this as well, because it feels like this was so integral to the NALPs that have been removed. Did you find that unusual?
I really liked the NELPs, and I really liked the way, the kahuiako kind of models too, where, people working more collaboratively across communities, supporting each other to resolve inter-school and intra-school kind of issues. So there's so much room for improvement. But we don't want to be going backwards either. I think we need to look at those policy settings, and that is what the IHC framework has been developed to do. As I said, it's not the perfect thing. You could have probably thought, oh, why did they say that? And, perhaps something else. But it's a beginning. It's the start of a conversation and a work program that deals with those policy settings. It is not going to solve the world or create world peace, but it will, I think, in time, make a difference to how the system understands and responds to disabled learners.
Yeah. Thanks, Trish. I mean, we're going to have to bring it to a close, as with most conversations around learning support. It's only
we could go on and on.
Really kind of scratch the surface. I mean, as you were talking earlier, I was thinking about the feeling that it must have been when that kind of settlement finally came through after 16 years. And then at the same time, I thought, holy crap, you're actually only at the very beginning now. You've actually got to go and kind of do all of the work. Um,
Mm.
And yeah, I fully agree. I mean, there's no silver bullet in all of this. But the bit that stood out to me in this whole piece of work is that whether they want to be there or not, the Ministry of Education is around the table, having to engage, and there are some kind of tangible wins here in terms of what they're committing to investigate. I know though that there are going to be people that are going to be interested in how do they follow along with this work. The IHC's website the best place to
Yes, and also the Ministry of Education's website and the Education Gazette. I talked with their comms team last week and said, schools don't know about this. What are we doing to? And they said, yeah, you're right. Come on, let's. So we worked out a better comms plan to kind of get the word out. And also it'd be great if people like yourselves and your organisation had direct input and, like contact me or someone else on the group and say, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So we welcome views from the outside coming into the group as well. So please make contact.
Yeah, look, I know that we've got a team of people that are ready to engage in all things learning support.
I'm already thinking of a couple of people that I think need getting in touch.
Yeah.
So
I was just contacted the other day by Eero, who requested that follow-up report we did around why Oars applications are being declined. And they said, and they asked me to send them the PDF directly because they couldn't access our website from within Eero. I was very tempted to ask, has AEC been blocked from Eero? But I couldn't.
Too many people were watching school briefs on their Smoko. That's what it was.
Yeah, that's right. No, we can't have this propaganda.
I'd have to say, there has been a real willingness, I think a genuine willingness to engage in this work and at the high ministry level. And at our last meeting, the deputy secretary came in and reaffirmed that. So I'm not particularly a Pollyanna, but I do think they are sincere in their intent to implement this framework, and we will work with them to ensure that they do.
Yep.
No.
Fantastic.
Thanks very much for giving up your afternoon with us, Trish, and we're very much looking forward to following along to see how this work progresses.
Yeah, and thank you for all the work that you're doing with AEC. I think it's a great coming together of great minds. So, yeah, I wish I was back in education and a much younger.
Hey, the door's always open. You know where to find us.
Okay, thank you. Right on.
Kia ora. Ka kite.
Ka kite anō.